Well, welcome everyone to this final day of PhiLab's Ontario's Hub Regional Conference. Today we have two panels and closing remark by Dr. Peter Elsens, PhiLab's co-director. I'd like to open this final day with a panel on identification of sector priorities for future research and development. The panel is slightly different format than the other ones we had so far, whereby panelists will have 10 minutes each to present. Then we'll just open the floor to encourage further interaction with the speakers. So housekeeping items. Everyone, including the presenters, need to have their video and audio off if not presenting to avoid distraction. Presenters can share their slides as well. Presenters will turn on video during the Q&A period. The audience member can turn on video when providing a comment or asking a question. We actually encourage that. At the end of the presentation, perhaps we can all turn our camera on and have kind of a more of an informal context happening so we can all further exchange. Participant can enter their question in the chat, of course, raise your hand as well with your reactions options. And if you want to, for clarity, each question written in the chat should start, we encourage you to start it with a Q so we can identify those with just more general comments. So for today, we have three presenters, well-known as well in the field of philanthropy. Dr. Susan Phillips is a professor, School of Public Policy and Administration at Carleton University in Ottawa, and the founder and director of its Masters of Philanthropy in Nonprofit Leadership, the only one in Canada. So she's also editor-in-chief of Nonprofit and Volunteer Sectors Quarterly. Suzanne research focus on place-based philanthropy and public policy for non-profits. She's co-editor of the Routledge Companion to Philanthropy and is currently leading a study team exploring the question, what makes some charities and nonprofits more resilient than others? So very much aligned to the topic today. Jean-Marc Mangin, which will be our second presenters today, is the president of Philanthropic Foundations Canada, a national network of family, independent and corporate grant makers in Canada, which includes many of the largest private charitable foundations in the country. Prior to PFC, Jean-Marc Mangin led the renewal process of the Federation of the Humanities and Social Sciences, the largest national organization of Canadian researchers and scholars, as its executive director from 2010 to 2016. Jean-Marc, I hope I did a good job there. And finally, we'll have David Lasby. He is the Director, Research and Evaluation at Imagine Canada for the past 10 years and has been at Imagine Canada for 20 years. So also great accomplishments here. So without any further ado, I would like to invite our first presenter to share her slides, Dr. Susan Phillips.
Thank you. We've been asked to talk about possible research priorities. And I'm going to take a somewhat different view on this, perhaps, because I'm not going to get into specifics. In terms of setting a research agenda for the sector, what would that look like and how should we do that? My own view is, having spent many decades in many different settings talking about a research agenda for the sector, that it never comes to fruition. Funding falls apart, people go on to other things. So the ability to drive a collective agenda with specific topics often is a bit diversionary, or at least it doesn't hold our attention for long enough. So I want to suggest, nevertheless, that data really matter. If you look at the unfunded report that students from our center was involved in with the Foundation for Black Communities, they came to us asking, simply that we don't really know, nobody's looked at how much funding from private and community foundations goes to Black-led, Black-serving organizations. And I had an alum and a PhD student who also teaches our community philanthropy course, set about to go through the T3010 data. We didn't have much time. It was a matter of weeks. So as important as the work was, it showed how even a little bit of data that exposed, that lifted back the curtain on what we thought was the case, but didn't know because nobody bothered to document it, how significant and important even those basic data could be. And imagine what we could do if we had a better data infrastructure. If we had connected data sets, collaborative arrangements where we could have access that question of funding very quickly without having to comb through the T3010. So rather than talk about specific topics, I want to talk about process and take a long view and the importance of getting the sector on agendas so that we can advance agendas. What do I mean by that? In terms of process, I think the most important thing is to have the mechanisms, the connections that helps scholars ask the right questions. The right questions being those that are significant and important to the sector, that the sector understands too what research are interested in looking in, because so much of research is curiosity driven. But scholars, whether they're graduate students or faculty or independent researchers, really want to, certainly in this field, do research that matters, that has impact. And sometimes the most important thing is appreciating what are the relevant, the quote, right questions to make the research relevant. That said, I think we are at a point of such systems change that there are transformational big questions coming out of the pandemic and of the racial justice movement. And that will take collective action. It will take the big questions. It will take groups of researchers, and it will take bodies to drive that agenda. And again, data infrastructure and using data in meaningful ways, as opposed to kind of pulling together bits here and there, is really important to that process. But as an educator, I also take a long view, and we need to grow the research field. It's underdeveloped in Canada certainly compared to the US or the UK. And therefore, we need to be producing across many disciplines and across many institutions, graduate students, doctoral students, postdoctoral students, and we need to find then places for those to be placed. If we're producing PhDs, as we should be, who are going to carry that research forward, they need to have positions in the sector, in academia, in governments. And I don't think those are as developed as they should be or need to be to really take research seriously in this country. I also see, and a lot of this comes from my work as editor-in-chief of NVSQ, where I see research from many countries. I don't think we have developed the multiplicity of research methodologies because we don't train our students well enough in a wide range of methodologies. And I would say that across both the nonprofit and public management fields in Canada, that we tend to be much more qualitative. And I value qualitative research. I do qualitative research, but I think we need to develop a stronger, bigger toolbox. And we need to enhance the value of research to the sector. I see often many big institutions in this sector not appreciating the value of what research can do, or you talk about data and eyes often glaze over. And for that research to have value and to be carried forward, the sector needs to be more on the agenda of governments, of the public, and that's part of the overall visibility of what's needed in the sector. Nevertheless, I would fail the marshmallow test, even though I said I don't think we can drive research agendas about specific questions. I think I would make the case that we are at a time when there are such big transformations taking place that I have at least a short list and probably a very long list underlying this of what some of those transformative questions might be. First of all, we need to document and analyze what's happening. We're through a period of enormous change. That's demographic change, that's changes around post-COVID, the justice movements, etc. So we need to know how the sector is doing, how philanthropy is doing, some basic capturing of that. I think there's a research agenda around the credibility of philanthropy. If we look to the US and the criticisms that have wafted north from that, we need to document, analyze, and understand what's distinctive about Canadian philanthropy. And there are new models of philanthropy emerging. Foundation for Black Communities is a very good example that embraced explicitly a community empowerment, a shift the power approach to how they'll work. I think we'll start seeing that taking hold across the sector. We need to understand better what enhances resiliency, what promotes innovation, and how to build that into greater innovation. There's a big agenda, naturally, because I do public policy, I would include this, around policy and regulation, and both provincially and federally. And I take policy very widely here, not only the regulation of charities, but funding regimes that have regulatory component, a whole variety of issues there. And funding models, something that ONN has been pushing for many years in terms of funding reform. As foundations look at less restrictive funding, at how we'll see hollowing out of many communities as a result of the pandemic and the hollowing out of services, the need to find new and more effective funding models, all of those should be part of our agenda. So while I said I wouldn't name topics, I did, and I look forward to a discussion on those.
Thank you, Susan, for laying out quite a lot, actually, for the Q&A period.